The world is corrupt, full of lies, run by sheep who don't know otherwise, seeking to keep the status quo, while controlling all that which you know. What if you saw a glaring hole in your world, a weakness, a stained history? Would you seek to change it, to fix it, even if it meant becoming a monster? Would you change the world for the better, even if it meant the destruction of the current one? How far will you go to right the wrongs of the past, to break the old ways, all for evolution? The world is stagnant, not advancing, stuck in its old ways, soiled by the blood of a god, built upon this king's crucifixion. Would you overthrow the old ways if you could, build a new one of strength, truth, logic, courage, even if it meant taking the same path as your crooked predecessors? Is progression our duty? Is transformation a necessity? Or is advancement a rotten dream? Is evolution a sin? Would you see the world for how it operates, or how it should be? Are you a loser, or are you a victor? Will the end truly justify the means? Thus is the tale of the fallen god, the promised king, Sosuke Aizen. This is a story often told in Bleach, as many characters traverse this blurry grey path, and you can say it is most prevalent with Bleach's most popular antagonist, the Ascended One himself, the ever-evolving enigma, the man who lies while speaking the truth, Sosuke Aizen. Aizen is one of the most popular villains in anime, and in this video we will come to understand more of his character. The shrewd and calculated Aizen was often thought to have planned everything in Bleach. Most developments were in fact because of him. This video will explore what he has done to uncover the impact he had on the series, just like his loyal follower in Tosen, which I covered in my previous video. Light novel readers had some important discoveries on Aizen's character. Sosuke Aizen did not have a big part to play in Can't Fear Your Own World, but even when he was imprisoned deep in Muken, he had a definite impact on the events that would unfold. Finally, we will analyze his character, his abilities, as well as some underlying themes. With this video, we will all come to better appreciate the misunderstood nature of Sosuke Aizen. Let's start with what we knew of him from the Bleach series, followed up with the revelations of Can't Fear Your Own World, and then an analysis of the ever-evolving enigma. Let us explore the tale of one of the most beloved characters in anime manga, and try to understand why Sosuke Aizen has been bestowed this brilliant accolade. At the start, when we were introduced to Aizen, he seemed like the most logical, kindest captain around, especially when you compare him to the other goons he was surrounded by. A sly, funny-looking snake, a psychotic madman with a weird cut, a creepy clown-looking guy, this drunk, pervy old man, some guy who coughs out his lungs regularly. I'm sure you get the point. He seemed like one of the only sensible ones around. Compared to everyone around, you could say he looked like some Goten nerd. Out of everyone, Aizen looked exactly like the kind of scrub who would get murked off screen and killed. What made things so great was that, spoilers aside, I don't think anyone would have thought of this dweeb to be the Machiavellian master of machinations, the main antagonist of the series. While many fans may have gotten Aizen spoiled, I did myself. Gin Ichimaru played the red herring well, in how we all thought he was the villainous one. To summarize Aizen's story at the start, he was killed off, but later, we would come to find through the famous words that it was all a part of Aizen's plan. This was all a ruse, so he could fake his death and eventually cripple the Soul Society by murdering Central 46, the governing authority of the Soul Society. This allowed him to gain full power by mimicking Central 46. One word can be used to describe it all: defecation. I mean defection. Well, he pretty much shat all over the Goten, so that works as well. We would see the defection of Sosuke Aizen, the most capable Soul Reaper among the Goten, alongside two Goten captains. The fallen god will ascend to new heights, ascend to the skies to make his escape, which was ironic. One would think he would fall down to the depths of the underworld when descending into betrayal. That is, unless you truly believe he is a fallen god, or rather an ascended one. Aizen would take over Hueco Mundo with ease, The sands of Hueco Mundo had seen much bloodshed. It had paid witness to many battles, but this takeover seemed almost effortless. Veni Vidi Vici would have been the right words to describe Aizen's conquest. He came, he saw, he conquered. So much so that the incredibly powerful king of Hueco Mundo would concede without much of a fight, with him and his ranks abiding to Aizen's will. Aizen would seek to start a war with his newly acquired ranks of Arrancar. Aizen would bless the Hollows with his ever-expanding perspective of advancement, in turn giving them more strength. Or like a poison, Aizen had spread his blasphemous views on evolution by helping the Hollows evolve, just like Aizen did himself. Aizen would task one of his Arrancars, Ulquiorra, to kidnap Orihime, in turn luring Ichigo and the gang. Through this, we would see the growth and evolution of countless characters. Ichigo made tremendous leaps of improvement, just like his friends. Some discovered their innate powers, some developed deeper bonds, some had finally tied up tragic loose ends, made peace with their past, and many obtained valuable experiences. With the battles of the fake Karakura Town arc, it would eventually lead to Aizen making a move against everyone there. Using his Kyoka Suigetsu, he would demolish the Gotei, making a complete utter mockery of them. He destroyed top-class killers and made it look easy, and then went on to extinguish the flames of the big boss man himself, Yama, causing him to lose an arm. Nothing could stop this man, not even death, as Aizen's conquest would continue even after getting killed via the fangs of the snake Gin Ichimaru. Aizen would evolve and soar to even higher heights through the Hogyoku. No one was left to even contend with Aizen, save the hero Ichigo Kurosaki, the hero that Aizen had a big part in creating, alongside the sneaky mentor, the shady man of 1,000 plans, Kisuke Urahara. After Isshin would buy some time for Ichigo to train in the Dangai, the fated battle would finally be upon us. We would see the battle of two ever-evolving specimens. Aizen would continue to transform, and so would Ichigo. Through the hero's final Getsuga Tensho, alongside his mentor sneaky Sealing Kido, Aizen would finally be defeated. I think Aizen's defeat really was beautiful. We learned the most about the mysterious Aizen at this very moment. In Aizen's defeat, there were some similarities to Kaname Tosen's loss. After holofying and gaining his sight, Tosen stopped using his perceptive spiritual abilities that made him so great. He was blinded by his newfound power, and you can say the same with Aizen. After gaining the Hogyoku and reaching the closest thing we've seen to immortality, his ever-scheming and 10 steps ahead of you nature was no longer needed. As a result, he allowed for Ichigo to gain incredible strength in the Dangai and was sealed by Kisuke, someone who did not have the luxury of the Hogyoku and still had to rely on his intellect. So you can say Aizen's defeat was caused by him being blinded by his own power, just like his trusty subordinate. However, that is just one way to look at things. At the end of this battle, after Ichigo clashed souls with Aizen, he would come to understand Aizen more so than anyone else. Through the songs sung through their blades, Ichigo would come to understand loneliness, isolation. He'd come to understand how a being with so much intellect and power could never fit in anywhere. Aizen was the closest thing to perfection, which is ironically what made things volatile to his psyche. The fact that he was perfect and had no rivals. There was no one on his level, and that brought upon a sense of loneliness inside him, a sense of longing for an equal. Aizen was the puppet master, dictating the pace of all Bleach events. He would wipe out the Gotei without even breaking a sweat. He made it look incredibly easy. No wonder he was lonely and sought an equal, if he could do that to top-class Shinigami. How boring will life be if you could do absolutely anything you wanted? If everything you sought for happened? Where is the excitement in life without any challenges? This void must have been amplified by the Hogyoku. After gaining this gem of an artifact, Aizen must have felt that everything he ever wanted would be his. With the Hogyoku, he even escaped death. If death could not stop him, then what will? Where is the thrill in life if everything you want can be yours without much struggle? Thus was the dilemma Sosuke Aizen likely fought with. That is where Ichigo enters, an anomaly, a being carrying all the races in a single vessel. If this being was put through trial after trial and slowly unlocked that hidden potential of his, maybe, just maybe, he can serve as a worthy adversary to Sosuke Aizen. Maybe he can be a rival to him. Now, for someone as unbeatable as Aizen, it makes sense how deep down he longed for someone to be on his level, someone to push him further, to limits he never knew were possible, as only so much progress can be gained on your own without someone pushing you. But with a rival, perhaps they can battle to their heart's content. With a rival, maybe he'll have someone to inspire him to be better. With a rival, perhaps the world wouldn't be so empty. Maybe, just maybe, with a rival, someone may finally come to understand Sosuke Aizen, to see what he does, to feel what he does, to accompany him on this never-ending path of growth and evolution. Maybe, a rival would be no different from a friend to a being like Sosuke Aizen. So did he indirectly train Ichigo to be an absolute weapon for this very reason, so that he too can experience what it means to have an equal, so that he can feel that never-ending thrill of having someone to rival him, so that they can grow together. Maybe, perhaps he had finally found someone with as much conviction to change the world as he did in Ichigo Kurosaki. It's lonely at the top is an understatement for the one known as Sosuke Aizen. Maybe this whole time, he schemed just so someone can meet him at the zenith he had reached so long ago. In Aizen's defeat, we were better able to understand his goals. Throughout his schemes, we knew he sought to evolve and destroy the boundaries between Hollows and Shinigami, resulting in a more powerful and advanced being. But right before his defeat, he would mention the Rio, the Soul King, and how he refused to be ruled by that thing. As time went on, we would find out that Aizen's plan was to march into the Soul King's palace and dethrone the Soul King so he can rule the world for himself. And finally, as discussed earlier, his goals perhaps had the betterment of Ichigo in mind, the ascendance of the being who Aizen had truly hoped would become his equal. To sum it up, at the end of Aizen's battle, we found out that deep down he longed for someone to be equivalent to him, or at least similar, and not even the internal desires of the most conniving and manipulative of characters could be hidden from the Hogyoku, the god of death who sought to transcend all those around him. Deep down, just wanted to have an equal. Deep down, he wanted someone to transcend to his level. Despite being the closest thing to perfection, his supposed perfection itself was his downfall in this battle. This was the best thing to happen to Aizen. It was his greatest test, his greatest defeat, and for someone as smart as him, it undoubtedly had an impact on his being, his ideas, and his overall outlook. With a supposed eternity to contemplate on what happened in the depths of Mukin, Aizen would come out stronger and better beyond question. When all the protectors of the Soul Society have passed on, it would be Aizen deep in Mukin, plotting and advancing in his own way. But we wouldn't have to wait that long to see him again. In flashbacks, we see Aizen doing exactly what you expect him to do. We do not have a backstory, but instead we witness the machinations and schemes of the man who was so far ahead of everyone else. We see him experimenting on his fellow Goten members through holification. In the Thousand-Year Blood War, we also see Aizen running an experiment with White through his fated encounter with Isshin and Misaki, thus resulting in the being known as Ichigo Kurosaki, laying the framework for the future events in Bleach. In the Thousand-Year Blood War, it would be Aizen who would perhaps save Ichigo from being imprisoned, held captive by Yhwach, and slowly transformed into a Quincy war machine. As Yhwach would say, it was Aizen who messed with his perception of time, forcing Yhwach to withdraw. To fight a monster, you must consult with your very own. To kill a demon, you must recruit the ones hidden underground. Thus is the path that Shunsui took as he decided to unleash Aizen back onto the realms. The same menace who was imprisoned for countless lifetimes was set free to wreak havoc on the Quincy, as the desperate Shinigami had no choice. It was here that Aizen would decimate the Soul King's remnants, and even go on to engage with Yhwach, two of Bleach's greatest villains going at it, while introducing us to the coolest Hado ever, Hado number 99, Goryu Tenmetsu. We were also given this panel in the fight, which is reminiscent of the Creation of Adam or Creation of Man painting by Michelangelo, featuring the first man and god. Whereas here we have the transcendent Aizen, the fallen god of death, against the Quincy King, the god amongst the Quincy, supposed progeny of the Soul King. This amazing confrontation would eventually lead to a showdown of monumental proportions, Aizen teaming up with Ichigo to face Yhwach. These events may just be one of the greatest moments in all of Bleach, with all the realms praying for their hero, Ichigo, to come out victorious, with the realms having a conflicted sense of relief now that the treacherous Aizen is fighting on their side once again. With all the realms at stake, the world's greatest hero, the world's greatest villain, fight together against the most terrifying and destructive force the realms have witnessed since its creation. And what a triumphant moment it was, the main villain of Bleach teaming up with the hero, the man he pretty much raised in a way, facing off against an unparalleled threat, a villain that transcends everything we have seen. But even these two would not be enough to take out the pride of the Quincy, the emperor cloaked within the shadows, the monstrosity known as Yhwach. As mentioned in the Yhwach video, a joint effort would be needed to have a chance to beat Yhwach. And here, Aizen would use his powers as a distraction to once again deceive Yhwach. Some refer to this moment as the hero and villain teaming up to combat the greater evil, but as this series should come to show, it is much deeper than that, and oftentimes no side can escape the label that is evil and even good. We even had this moment earlier in the fight, where Aizen would speak to Ichigo, but it would get interrupted, so we never had a conversation with them. What was Aizen going to say to Ichigo in this moment? He stopped mid-fight against the strongest being they have ever seen to say something, so it must have been important. After the Thousand-Year Blood War events, it would not be Ichigo or any of his closest allies that would narrate the end. No, it would be Sosuke Aizen from the depths of Mukin, who would state why Yhwach's philosophy and world was wrong in his eyes. A world devoid of fear, a world without the fear of death would result in a world where humanity's main obstacles are taken away. Without these obstacles, the triumphs of accomplishments and growth will also be taken away. Without death, it would ultimately lead to the degeneration of all beings because they no longer have the greatest motivator in death to keep pushing them forward. The world will become placid, with its residents lacking the courage and hope that is tied to death, fear, and conquering your fears. Ironically, it was Aizen mentioning all of this, the one who escaped death through the Hogyoku, and so he was the best person to speak on this topic because he speaks from experience. Through his contemplation in Mukin, he must have understood that his conquest of perfection had its own flaws. He must have evaluated over his immortality and found some disadvantages to it, with the lack of courage and drive being one of them, since he no longer has death pushing him forward. Without death at the back of his mind, he lost his greatest force of improvement and evolution. In short, where Yhwach sought a world of stagnation, a world devoid of fear, Aizen sought a world of evolution, with fear being a necessity for that world. Other than not wanting to be subjugated by another, that was another reason why Aizen could not follow Yhwach. Aizen is a fitting person to be the narrator, one of the select few who can be given the honor to do so, as he had closely watched Ichigo and his exploits. I think Aizen would be a fitting narrator to the whole series, telling the stories of the world while in the depths of Mukin. He'd make for a legendary one, as someone who had schemed to change the world, to sculpt it to his liking, only to see someone who he had a hand in creating do it himself. The only other person who'd be a fitting narrator would be the other mysterious man who is running Bleach away from the limelight, the one who I have mentioned so many times in relation to Aizen. With Aizen's story summarized, I wanted to go through and answer the questions of what exactly did Aizen plan before I go into the light novels. Why is Aizen often given the title of Master Schemer and Manipulator? Let's go back and find out. We can start by turning back the pendulum. In the past, he orchestrated the holification of the Gotei, the characters now known as the Vizards. Before that, he would scheme to create his half of the Hogyoku, thus coming in contact with a young Rangiku and catching the elusive eyes of Gin Ichimaru. Aizen was behind Ichigo's greatest ally in white. It was Aizen who cultivated this being and set the motion in progress to link it to Ichigo. Aizen would perhaps for the first time come in contact with something that was not a part of his plan, and it would change his life and everyone else's. You can see the intrigue and wonder on his face in this very panel. Thus, Aizen played a vital role in Ichigo's conception, witnessing White melding together with Masaki while saving Isshin, which in turn would lead to Ichigo. Now, back to the start of Bleach. In the beginning, Aizen would wipe out Central 46 and control the Soul Society from the shadows. From there, he would send Rukia, the wielder of Urahara's Hogaku, to the Soul Society. Rukia would be drawn to Ichigo, and no wonder, Ichigo was a relative to Rukia's mentor, Kain Shiba, and he looked just like him. Ichigo had latent spiritual powers just waiting to be unlocked, and it was Rukia who would be the catalyst to that. She would ignite the engine and finally start the journey of the world's greatest hero. Aizen would send over Fishbone D, a hollow, to attack Ichigo's family to unlock Ichigo's powers, and he correctly predicted this as Rukia would transfer her powers to Ichigo. Later, when Uryu placed Hollow Bait, it attracted a Menos Grande. This of course had Uryu perplexed, and so perhaps it was Aizen who arranged this to further advance Ichigo's prowess. Aizen would call for Rukia to be punished by the Soul Society through the Central 46, which again were all slain, thus allowing him to retrieve Urahara's Hogaku and combine it with his own. This in turn brought Ichigo to the Soul Society, but before that, he was confronted by Renji and Byakuya. Having these two sent over ensured that they would have a meeting again in the future. That said, if the Hogaku was the goal, I am sure he could have retrieved it with ease far earlier. The argument against this was that he needed the Sokyoku to get the Hogaku from Rukia, but instead he found a different way once he faked his death and gained access to hidden documents and technology within the Soul Society. However, if you assume that he could have found a way to get it earlier, it was like Aizen wanted to use all of these events to bring out the latent potential of Ichigo as well as those around him. When Ichigo arrived to the Soul Society arc, he was welcomed by the trusty old happy snake Gin, who of course colluded with Aizen until his very last breaths. Gin would dispose of Ichigo despite not following his orders, but Ichigo would survive, and as a result, the bloodthirsty Kenpachi would be on his trail to hunt Ichigo down. In a sense, Gin's actions are what led Kenpachi onto Ichigo's trail after he found out that he survived the captain's attack. Perhaps this was planned by Aizen as well. Despite Ichigo's insane potential, there were some captains that Ichigo could not have beaten, and Kenpachi was perhaps the only one he could have beaten. He did not have the bad luck of Chad to be stuck with someone who would defeat him with ease. From there, he would defect and send Ulquiorra after Orihime, again leading for Ichigo to infiltrate another world and save a friend. This time in Hueco Mundo. Ichigo would then face off not once but twice against Ulquiorra, with Ulquiorra going as far as killing him the first time. He would face off against Grimmjow to strengthen his holification abilities, and then finally fight against the full power Ulquiorra and go full Vastolorde. So far, all of Aizen's exploits have resulted in Ichigo getting stronger. On top of that, you can argue most important characters did get stronger and better, as without Aizen's insurrection, without the battles with the Hollows, the Shinigami would have been slaughtered by the ever-looming Quincy threat, which would manifest in the Thousand Year Blood War. As Aizen mentions here, all your battles took place here in the palm of my hands. Up till this moment, everything was carefully calculated by Aizen to bring out Ichigo's potential and make him the man he is today. Of course, there are others who had a similar part to play, mainly one man, which I've been constantly mentioning, but do not worry, he'll be the next character I'll cover in my Can't Fear Your Own World series. Aizen would also betray Halibel in the fake Karakura Town battle. The fact that he betrayed his own subordinates and the rest of the Arrancars may have very well saved their lives. After some time, the Hollows seemed to be on better terms with the Soul Reapers, and I believe the betrayal was needed for that. They now have common grounds in being betrayed, as well as a common enemy in Aizen. But if Halibel and the Hollows were never betrayed, and the enemy was outright defeated, it may have caused some problems between the two sides. So perhaps this was thought through by Aizen as well, or it wasn't, who knows. Before Aizen fought Ichigo, he would go on to destroy the Kotutsu, the cleaner in the Dangai, which is what allowed Ichigo to train for an increasingly long time, giving us the Dangai Ichigo form which fans like to label. Again, giving Ichigo that time to train may have been the very reason for this. Or it could have just been the rebellious nature of Aizen, more of which I'll talk about later. After his fight with Ichigo, we would see the disappearance of Aizen for quite some time until the Thousand Year Blood War. The next scheme of his would be when he confronted Yhwach in Mukin. As mentioned earlier, he would mess with Yhwach's perception of time, thus preventing Yhwach from taking Ichigo with him. The rest seemed like Aizen was living in spontaneity as he was released from prison to combat the Quincy threat. For once, it was as if Aizen was not the puppet master and was set to roam free without constraints, without having to play the role of the planner. Perhaps Aizen's scheming and interest in holification were precautions for this ever-looming Quincy threat. With the events of the Bleach anime manga completed, this leads to the light novels, Can't Fear Your Own World in particular. Aizen did not have a massive part to play in the series, but he was still nevertheless an important character in the background. We first see Aizen in a flashback when he was sent back to Muken at the end of Thousand Year Blood War. In here, he would engage in a conversation with the main character of the series, while also crippling all those around him with his spiritual pressure. Let's dive through the light novel series and go through the impact and discoveries of Sosuke Aizen. In Can't Fear Your Own World, it started off with Aizen being imprisoned back into Muken. When asked by Shunsui if he had any last words, Aizen replied by saying no one was worthy enough to receive his words. Just as he was about to be taken away, they were interrupted by a furious Shuhei Hisagi. Despite what Aizen said earlier, he would use his spiritual pressure to freeze those holding him up in his chair and engage in a conversation with the heated Hisagi. Aizen had found someone who was worthy enough to receive his words. When Shunsui later questions Aizen about his change of heart for having some final words, Aizen would then say it was for entertainment. Regardless if it was for entertainment or not, Aizen did acknowledge Shuhei for his struggles with him and the man that connects both of them together, Kaname Tosen, in a way proving he was worthy enough for Aizen's words. Aizen would speak to Hisagi, and those very words would echo in Hisagi's mind for the rest of Can't Fear Your Own World. Slowly, Shuhei would decipher the dark past of the Soul Society, while he will learn more about who Aizen and Tosen really were. Now, what was it that prompted Aizen to use his spiritual pressure to freeze everyone around him? The furious Shuhei Hisagi, all bandaged up from the Thousand Year Blood War, would show up because he wanted to see the killer and corrupter of his teacher imprisoned. Shunsui wanted to limit Aizen's words because of how dangerous the man was. Despite being strapped down in a chair, limiting most of his abilities, he still arguably possessed his most dangerous power, his words. Aizen was always enshrouded in mystery, but one thing was known widely. His words would always pierce the hearts and souls of those around him. Everyone would wish that everything he spoke of was false. With all of their souls, they would despise him. But no matter how hard they wished and hated, there was always that shred inside their being that knew Sosuke Aizen was absolutely right. When Shunsui tried to limit Aizen's speech, Aizen would reply, "Are you afraid a conversation with me will cause Soul Reapers to defect, just like with Kaname Tosen?" Which was the common belief. In reality, that was far from the truth, as we would later come to find out. While all looked down at the name of Kaname Tosen, some with pity, some with hatred, some spitting at the very thought of him, one person refused to allow Tosen's name to be further tarnished, that person being his protege, Shuhei Hisagi. Shuhei would say that even after battling alongside Ichigo to beat Yhwach, Aizen would always be Tosen's enemy forever. Aizen would reply to Hisagi by saying, "Forever is a word that shouldn't be uttered so lightly. Even Tosen's conviction wasn't eternal after all." Hisagi was perplexed and angered, like most were under the influence of Aizen. Aizen would say that, "Eventually time will come when you all will understand the treacherous fantasy of the Soul Society." What could have Aizen been alluding to when talking about this treacherous fantasy of the Soul Society? Could it have been the mutilation of the Soul King? The fact that the world ran on a crucified god? Or maybe there is more? If someone were to know, I would say Aizen is one of the select few who would know. Everyone there must have thought that these were big words coming from Aizen, the one who backstabbed everyone. However, if the foundations of the Soul Reaper started from treachery, would that make Aizen the most fitting Soul Reaper? Could you really say Aizen was evil if the Soul Reapers themselves were founded upon the same treachery? Would you say Soul Reapers as a whole are evil? Now, what were the important words spoken between Aizen and Hisagi that would illuminate Hisagi's path? While Hisagi continued to get flustered with Aizen's words, Aizen dropped these bombs that would stick with Hisagi and help him better understand himself and the world. What you feel isn't hate, it's just sentimentality for Kaname Tosen and what he left behind. You would do well to remember this. Regardless of how firm your resolve is, you can't defeat the strong with sentimentality alone. even on the verge of death. Those words played on repeat in Hisagi's mind, and for good reason. Sentimentality for Kaname Tosen was the driving force for Shuhei Hisagi. Despite his mentor being a criminal, Tosen's influence on Hisagi was undoubtedly for the better, and that was the reason for his frustrations when approaching the man who killed his mentor. Hisagi was largely led by emotions when it came to Tosen, and he felt that as long as he followed the path set by Tosen, he would be on the righteous path. It was those emotions, the sadness, the nostalgia that blinded him. That was until Aizen struck deep down inside him, saying that alone will not suffice. Because the truth is, Hisagi does not know Tosen's true path, his true past. He did not understand Tosen as much as he would have liked to believe. He just assumed Aizen deceived Tosen, when the truth was, Hisagi did not want to accept any other explanation. Aizen would say that this whole conversation was for entertainment, under the impression that his modest words may even change the Soul Society a little, which, as we would come to find out later, in fact did. Right as Aizen was being carried back into prison, he uttered the following words: "If you want to see through the truth, you must flounder and sacrifice your own flesh, blood, and soul. At least that's what Kaname Tosen did. Maybe you should know that." And thus began Hisagi's quest for the truth of Tosen, and many other dark secrets of the Soul Reapers. And perhaps this would even hint at how Hisagi will come to find peace with his own soul, and achieve the feat that all Shinigami long for, Bankai. More of which I will discuss in Hisagi's own video, which will be the longest one yet, and the final one of this series. I would like to think Aizen here was tying up loose ends for Kaname Tosen's sake. He did not owe Kaname anything, but he knew how much Hisagi meant to Tosen, and so perhaps here he was sharing some wisdom to repay back Tosen for his loyalty, or perhaps it was truly for entertainment, as Aizen mentioned. Hisagi's character and his motives in the light novels are largely tied towards uncovering truths, and so Aizen's words here were very important for Shuhei Hisagi. Despite not being Hisagi's mentor and an enemy towards Hisagi, Aizen would guide Shuhei with this small conversation. As for Aizen, the main discoveries made of his character through Camp for Your Own World were through his underling Kaname Tosen. Now, what was Kaname Tosen's backstory? I highly recommend watching the Tosen video I made, as I discuss it in detail over there. My Camp for Your Own World videos are best watched in order, as I talk about similar topics and each video leads on to the next one. Here's a quick summary. Tosen's lifelong friend had decided to become a Shinigami, and she was then married to a nobleman. However, she was killed by that crooked nobleman, and he would go on to mock and torture Tosen. After avoiding the severe punishments for all his crimes, the nobleman would humiliate Tosen by beating him down, and then he would call upon 2 guards to continue the beatdown. After getting physically, mentally, spiritually abused, Tosen would get saved by an unlikely Shinigami, Sosuke Aizen. Aizen would intervene by using his Kyoka Suigetsu to get the guards to beat themselves instead of Tosen. From there, Tosen would dedicate himself to serving Aizen and his vision for a new world, as Tosen's very purpose became to get revenge on the Shinigami. In turn, he would give Tosen salvation through an avenue for his revenge, as well as a pure world where someone like him would not have been wronged, at least in theory. This could have very well been Aizen taking precaution against people who are immune to his powers in Kyoka Suigetsu. When you consider Tosen is immune to his abilities, it is easy to assume that Aizen wanted to recruit Tosen to be on his side, rather than be an enemy of him. But at the same time, Tosen's same enemy was that of Aizen's. Tosen sought to overthrow the same ones who Aizen sought to overthrow, so perhaps this deadly alliance was meant to be. Tosen's only request to Aizen would be that he asked to be killed if he ever got to a point where he came to forgive the Soul Reapers, which is what Aizen would go forward with in the Fate Karakura Town arc. Camp for Your Own World as a whole shed new light on the character that is Sosuke Aizen. Earlier on, he was portrayed as a monster, a genius, a being that transcends all, but Camp for Your Own World helped us understand his motives. He did not kill Tosen out of cold blood, but because Tosen asked Aizen to do so as his one and only wish, Aizen would fulfill his most loyal subordinate's only wish, despite no one truly coming to understand it. Aizen was portrayed as a being who only cared about himself, backstabbing everyone to get on the top, but this scenario was different. Perhaps there are more situations like this that were hidden from us. In Camp for Your Own World, we also found out about the dark history of the Soul King. As mentioned in the Yhwach video, the Soul King debacle also changes how you view Aizen. Aizen was a monster in the anime manga. a treacherous being with immense, incomprehensible power. The whole time he wanted to overthrow the old ways, create a world that would prosper without the Soul King. And for most of Bleach, we did not know what the Soul King was, let alone the history behind it. But in Camp Fear Your Own World, after learning about the Soul King's past, as well as Zero Squad's contingency plans for Ichigo to become the Soul King, Sosuke Aizen's plan does not seem so bad. His desire to rid the world of the Soul King and reign supreme does seem like a lesser evil, if, with a massive if, he could rule it justly. With the Hogyoku, Aizen could possibly surpass the Soul King to a point where one is no longer needed with his ever-evolving nature, and that would be favorable over Ichigo being forced into that position. That is the beauty of Camp Fear Your Own World. The main villain of Bleach, in fact, made a lot of sense. So much sense that he alone was on the path to save the main character from eternal servitude as the Soul King, a path that many of us would follow if it meant ensuring Ichigo's future. With all of this information, some of the villains in Bleach don't look so bad. It is quite ironic how they, the villains, had a better fate for Ichigo than the Soul Reapers themselves. Would Aizen have forced Ichigo to take the place of the Soul King? Would Yhwach have forced Ichigo to do the same? Wouldn't that be an evil thing to do? Yet, it was the Soul Reapers that were the ones who wanted to imprison Ichigo for an eternity. Who is the villain in this situation? Both Aizen and Yhwach, although different temperaments, ideals, and visions of the world, had the same goal of ridding and succeeding the Soul King. Yes, the Soul Reapers had the betterment of the world in mind, but I would like to assume that Aizen and Yhwach did as well. What truly would have led to the best outcome, we will never know. Perhaps the Shinigami had the best world at the end, but it would be a bitter end knowing that Ichigo would be needed to succeed the Soul King. And of course, as mentioned in the Ichigo video, Ichigo would probably go through with becoming the next Soul King if it was for the greater good. Very Soul King-like, but I personally would more so like to believe that he would break the wheel of fate and find a better solution. Back to Aizen. Sosuke Aizen was always a being far from understandable. He stood on peaks that no one would dare to even reach. You could assume him to be a perfect of a Soul Reaper if there ever was one. Aizen was so advanced that no one was able to comprehend his goals, his true intentions, save a select few characters. For most of Bleach, Aizen was a mystery, but through Camp Fear Your Own World, it shed more light on his intentions and character. Camp Fear Your Own World did a good job in further humanizing Aizen. We thought he was a disgraced god, a demon with ideas and plans we could not relate to, a Machiavellian monster who just kills just because he can or because he finds it amusing. But even the most dangerous of monsters have some sense to them. In Aizen's case, he had all the sense in the world. He wanted to reshape the world, and he had the power to do it. With the Hogyoku, the zenith to Aizen's abilities has yet to be even reached, but will we ever learn of what Aizen's world could have been? If he could govern the world as a just ruler? We cannot say at this point because again, we do not know what his world would have been like. However, through his actions and in his ascension, I like to think many more would suffer and be killed. But who knows? Will we ever get to see the end goal to judge if it was truly pure? If it truly was for the better? I'm afraid we never will know, just like Yhwach's world, unless of course Kubo allows for it. An important thing to note was that no one in the Bleach world had the knowledge Aizen had, save a few characters like Urahara. From his words in his defeat, it is safe to say he knew everything about the Soul King's past, and the same with Kisuke. Perhaps all of this was just the tip of the iceberg. Perhaps there are many more darker secrets. Perhaps Aizen even knew that Ichigo would eventually become a Soul King candidate and be doomed to that same position, as he was there for his inception. Not literally, but you know what I mean. If that was the case, it really does paint him to be more heroic than we ever would have thought. And if you assume Kisuke knew everything as well, it does give him a more darker aura. The Soul King's mutilation is often referred to as the original sin by fans, and it was Aizen who was the first one to refer to what happened to the Soul King as the original sin. You saw it at the Ryoku, didn't you? You saw the Soul Society's original sin. It's ironic how the biggest criminal alive is the one who likened the name, but it shows you the stronghold the Soul Reapers have. Only a criminal like him could speak of such things like this, let alone come to learn of such things, which is something less than 1% of the world knew. Just what secrets of the Bleach world does Aizen know of? If there was anyone to know of the dark secrets of this world without being in a high position of power, I would like to think it was Aizen. Perhaps with Aizen's knowledge, he would have been on the more understandable side. Maybe in the Hell arc, we will find out more about the world. Until then, it will remain a mystery. But all of this made me wonder, if everyone knew what was done to the Soul King, if everyone knew that Ichigo was next in line and he would be forced onto the same position, would they really disagree with what Aizen was doing? Could Aizen have been the lesser evil? Would Ichigo's closest friends disagree with what Aizen was doing? Would they fight alongside him or continue to oppose him? If everyone had the knowledge that Aizen had, as well as whatever else he knew about the Soul Society that we have still yet to learn, would Aizen be considered a treacherous monster, or would he be considered a hero? Another discovery from Camp for Your Own World was that Ichigo's Shiba clan ancestors would have approved of what Aizen was doing, not so much of him killing and deceiving others, but in seeking to replace the Soul King. The old Shiba ancestor would have traded spots with the Soul King, as they were against the Soul King's ceiling, and Aizen is similar, but not exactly. Aizen is getting rid of the need for a Soul King by ruling and taking the world upon himself with his unlimited powers through the Hogyoku. In short, Aizen will not need to be crippled and rendered a slave to this world. He could do it with the powers of the Hogyoku alone. Supposedly, that is. Is that not a good thing? No being will be bound to eternal servitude through this method. This is what makes Ichigo's and Aizen's relations interesting, despite Ichigo not knowing of his true Shiba ancestral lineage. Maybe once he finds out more about it as well as the past of this world, he may take it to himself to agree with Aizen. All of that said, you cannot deny Aizen's treachery. Aizen without a doubt is a murderer, a monster, but in the lens of others, so are the Soul Reapers. So is the Gote 13, the devilish victors, through the eyes of the other races. The losers, not the winners. What does the future hold for Aizen? The Bleach world is a terrifying and treacherous one, and the worst is yet to come in Hell. There will be a bigger threat, and for that reason I am sure Aizen will see light again. He is far too powerful of a being for the Soul Society not to make use of. If the Hell arc does come to fruition, it could be that we may very well see Aizen's Bankai, or even more information about his past. As Kubo has stated, he would like to expand on certain characters if he'd got the time. I also believe Aizen and Ichigo will meet once again. We saw them briefly fight together in Thousand Year Blood War, and it was one of my favorite parts in the arc. In Camp for Your Own World, when Aizen mentioned that no one deserves his words, he did follow up with, though I did want to talk to Ichigo Kurosaki a bit more. Did Kisuke Urahara get the wrong idea about me? I'm not sure what he meant in regards to Kisuke. Perhaps Kisuke prevented them from talking after the Thousand Year Blood War. Regardless, I'm sure we all can see them fighting again on the same side, as well as having more interactions in the future. What do you all think they will talk about if they met up? I felt the Soul King will definitely come up. Aizen will probably be like, "It's been a while, Ichigo Kurosaki. We didn't get to talk last time, but I believe you must have seen the thing that they call the Soul King," or something along the lines of that. I also feel that it may be Aizen who will tell Ichigo about the plans Zero Squad had for him if Yhwach's remnants were not able to take the Soul King's place. This would be a huge and pretty heart-wrenching moment if Ichigo does find out, assuming he does not already know, and I feel Aizen may be the only one with the balls to tell him. This also brings into question, what if Ichigo was forced to become the Soul King? When the hyenas are out cornering their wounded prey, if Ichigo does in fact end up being forced to be the Soul King, I can think of no other person who would be a greater ally to him than Aizen. The interactions between Aizen and Kazui would be very interesting as well if the worst case scenario were to happen to Ichigo, whatever it may be. If all his friends were taken out / betrayed him and Kazui was left on his own, there would be only one man who would be fitting to train the boy and tell the tales of his legendary father. The man who secretly trained Ichigo, the man who constructed obstacles for the hero and saw the ascent of the world's greatest protector, Sosuke Aizen. Maybe Aizen truly is the narrator of the story. All of this was in fact him telling the story of Ichigo Kurosaki to his protege, the young Kazui Kurosaki. All in all, despite being locked away in Mukin, Aizen would rise once again as stated through the last words in the light novels, even if they are able to surpass that corpse in the end. I will wait with anticipation, looking forward to the time when their journey illuminates my own path. There are loads of speculation you can make about the future of Bleach, but what do you all think? What do you think we will see in the future for Aizen? In Camp for Your Own World, we also had a very cool parallel between villains. As Aizen was being transported back into Muken while strapped down to his chair, he would have a heated conversation with Hisagi, mainly about Kaname Tosen. We would then see a flashback of Tosen, and after that we will be taken back to present time, where another man was sitting on a chair. While Aizen was sitting on a chair that suppressed his powers, this other character was sitting on the throne of the Tsunayashiro clan, which accentuated his powers by allowing him to do whatever he wanted, being the new leader. That character was Tsunayashiro Tokunada. Aizen was being sent back into prison, hidden in the shadows. However, it was the opposite for Tokunada, who would be emerging out of the shadows and shaking up the world just like Aizen once did. This was a good contrast between the characters. They both were related to Tosen through past experiences, one causing him incredible amounts of suffering, and the other bringing upon reprieve, being a guide for him. Aizen was credited for Tosen's downfall, but it was in fact Tokunada who was the cause for what Tosen had become. As one menace is locked up and put in order on his chair, another wakes up on his throne to soon bring chaos. This was a symbolic passing of the torch in a way, from one scheming, treacherous villain to another. It gives you the feeling, as if one demon goes to sleep, another one awakens. With Can't Fear Your Own World covered, let's go through an analysis of Aizen's character, as well as some overarching themes of his. Throughout Bleach, Aizen was an agent of chaos, one of the many in Bleach. He constantly sought change through chaotic means alongside his unparalleled ambitions to become the supreme ruler of the world, with incalculable patience to plot for such a long time. Aizen was one of the biggest driving forces in Bleach, if not the biggest one, and you can see that from the earlier section where I explained exactly what he planned. With despair being a reoccurring theme in Bleach, all characters bear the brunt of it, and you can assume that it was even felt by the notorious Sosuke Aizen. Perhaps Aizen most felt despair through living in a world that was not ruled by anyone, a world that stunted evolution and frowned upon transcendence in his eyes. Or rather, he felt the despair of not changing the world despite how perfect he may think he is. Despair of not leaving your mark, which may have very well led to his actions. Perhaps the most prevalent theme associated with Aizen would be evolution. The chaotic nature of Aizen allowed him to evolve at rates only paralleled by his unlikely protege, Ichigo Kurosaki. Most of Aizen's exploits seem to stem from this urge for evolution. His dabbling with hollows and holification, as well as his role in the ascent of Ichigo attest to this. You can only evolve so much on your own, but with a worthy challenger that pushes you to your limits, the growth for someone with infinite potential would be endless. Perhaps that is why he caused so much trouble while taking such an interest in Ichigo. It felt like Aizen had nothing to challenge himself, and so he had to create a challenge. He needed to create obstacles to drive him to further evolve. Villains in general are often given backstories to help humanize them, to help the readers more so relate to them. But for Aizen, he has none of this. Kubo himself mentioned he wasn't a fan of the trope because he would rather the fans have a divide with the characters. And that could very well be the reason why Aizen is so beloved. He was on an inconceivable level, one that fans cannot truly fathom and come to relate to. He was the absolute best, and his loss came from hoping that he could have an equal out of the loneliness of being the best. Again, something that the majority of people could not personally relate to. With the grey morality of Bleach explored in the light novels, let's dive upon the question that is brought upon with every villain. Was Aizen truly wrong? Despite his actions, everything did seem to work out for the better, for those who survived, that is. The countless conflicts led to stronger, more developed, more capable fighters to ward off any threats. That we can agree upon. But what about from a moral standpoint? Let's hear both sides. Aizen was an advocate of evolution. His exploits resulted in countless advancements in terms of powers and abilities. Could you say that is a bad thing? If the keepers of the world truly were keeping back the evolution of the realms and its residents, could Aizen really have been wrong? Would you say it is a crime against the world to stick to the old ways rather than evolve and advance to become better? Of course, The answer usually lies in the way the person enacts their ideals, the way they seek to bring upon change, and that is the difference between the so-called heroes and villains, with the other difference being the loser and the victor, something Sosuke Aizen is far too familiar with. The obvious question with Aizen that comes up on this topic is, can you really justify the countless killings for evolution, for progress? You cannot. No matter the intentions, it doesn't matter at the end of the day. As the poet Khalil Gibran would say, the smallest act of kindness is worth more than the greatest intention. The actions are far more important than intent, especially when lives are involved. However, one thing we do know is that history is written by the victors, and that is no different from our world. Once you attain complete victory, none of the aforementioned matters, as you now have access to history and you can rewrite it to whatever you would want it to be, which is something the leaders of the world have undoubtedly done. Ichigo's powers are closely linked to that, with him not only being able to write history as a leader of the Shinigami, but through his powers as well, having the ability to hide and manipulate names. Now what about the morality of Aizen? Aizen's moral standpoint can be considered to be ethical egoism, which is categorized when people act according to their own self-interest rather than the benefit of others. Aizen perhaps had the betterment of the world in mind, but by the looks of it, that was just a facade. Through all of Aizen's killings and machinations, you can assume Aizen sought to reign supreme for his own self-interest rather than for the sake of others. If he truly cared about others and wanted a better world, he wouldn't have killed as many people as he did. He would have sought a better, more desirable way for improvement, and a better, more desirable fate for all those deaths he had a part in. Throughout Bleach, you can understand that Aizen thinks very highly of himself. He believes there is a great divide between him and the majority of the Bleach characters. He believes he knows far more than everyone else, and so no one can truly fathom his reasoning, which could very well be true. For those reasons, however, he lacks empathy and believes that he knows what is best, when in truth, his lack of empathy is why he does not know what is best for everyone. That is why Aizen takes upon the ends justify the means philosophy. It is why most villains of Bleach take on the same viewpoint. For more on morality, check out my Death Note video, the first video I ever made on this channel, for a longer discussion on moral theories and ethics. Aizen is a great example of a character who seeks to bring upon change, a revolution, and in doing so he becomes a monster. As discussed in my Can't Fear Your Own World intro video, it is often the ones who want to bring upon the most change with good intentions that bring the worst harm. The revolutionaries of our world are quite similar in how their ideals seem to be righteous and virtuous, but the path to reach them was far from it. It is through the path of enacting their ideals that their ideals themselves degenerate far from the initial goal. Aizen's story also shows us that no matter how evil you can be perceived, the most condemned of people can always show heroic qualities. The villain can always wander down the path of redemption and be a hero in the eyes of some. In most stories, the villain, in their eyes, see themselves as the hero. Most Bleach villains fall into the same category, with one exception. A certain wicked being, who I will eventually cover, so be sure to sub so you don't miss out. Throughout this video, I have mentioned the word treachery a few times, so let's talk about the Bleach original soundtrack, the theme known as Treachery, which is often considered to be Sosuke Aizen's theme. Bleach is often regarded to have the best or one of the best soundtracks in anime, and the theme Treachery is a popular fan favorite. This soundtrack was made by Shiro Sagisu, and you'll probably hear me singing his praises many times as he is the genius behind Bleach's music. Treachery was released for the Diamond Dust Rebellion movie's original soundtrack, and it has appeared in many Bleach episodes/movies. The original soundtrack named Treachery was popularized through his association with Sosuke Aizen, with many considering Treachery to be Aizen's theme because it usually plays when he is around. Although this isn't his theme, it does make sense why it usually plays around him. This soundtrack usually plays around the themes of treachery, deception, and so Treachery is a perfect name for it. And no wonder Sosuke Aizen is regularly tied to the soundtrack. Treachery is a characteristic that fits well with Aizen, and its song's lyrics describe the thought of a person who is being deceived and played. This is at a core what Aizen does throughout the series, and the soundtrack fits well when Aizen is pulling off a devious sleight of hand, betraying those around him. Let's go through the words within the soundtrack to better understand what it means. Here are the lyrics. On first glance, you can see that the lyrics are in the point of view of someone being betrayed. The person is using the various senses to come to the realization that they have been intentionally deceived. In relation to Aizen, you can say that the song describes the senses that he controls. Kyoko Suigetsu is a total hypnosis of 5 senses, and this song mentions 4 of them, missing only taste. Taste would be kind of weird to include, so having 4 of them is still enough for many fans to draw similarities to Aizen's abilities. It perfectly describes the feelings and internal monologue on what others are thinking about Aizen once he betrays them, as well as referencing the different senses Aizen has manipulated. That said, there are instances when this soundtrack was used when there was no inherent treachery involved. It would be a disservice to limit the times this amazing soundtrack appears, so I can see why it was used in other scenes where no deception was involved. All in all, I think that having specific soundtracks for specific themes within the story, such as betrayal, does add an extra level to the atmosphere, especially when you understand the lyrics to it. This helps add to the feeling of treachery, literally giving a song to a certain characteristic, thus adding to the feeling and aura of a character who often betrays others. With the lyrics covered, let's go through the orchestra to get a sense of the overall feel that treachery gives us. In the soundtrack, we have a heavy brass to start things off. This is more of a mysterious intro, as if we're in a situation we don't fully understand, as if we are leading up to something big. We have cymbals ringing like an alarm bell, as if something isn't right. It's like you're coming to the realization that you've been betrayed, but not just there yet. All the clues are slowly adding up. There's a snare drum rolling in the back, and a loud thump from what seems like a bass drum coming in and out. It gives you the feeling as if something may be wrong. And so as a result, we will march forward with caution through the snare drum and fall deeper down in trouble with the bass, walk one step forward, stop and assess, and continue on as if we are trying to figure out the enemy's trap. It is then that we are met with the glorious strings, accompanied by percussions crackling in the background. The majestic strings are a signature of Sagisu's works, something he often uses in his soundtracks, and is probably one of my favorite things about it, alongside the choir. You can hear this from his soundtracks in Evangelion as well. When the strings hit is when you find out you've been deceived, and it is vocalized by the lyrics right after, while the percussion dictates the pace with its rhythm in the background. The strings match the melody of the lyrics, a perfect complement to the eerie but epic choir. The theme gives off the feeling that you've not just been deceived in a crude and plain way. No, you've been outplayed, outclassed in the highest way you can think of, in a flawless, work of art kind of way, similar to how Aizen pulled the strings as Bleach's puppet master. In addition, there are a few remixes to this soundtrack. I have found 3 in total. In the 1000-Year Blood War, we have this one, which starts with a deranged screech from an electric guitar. The start is like you find yourself transported into a horror movie. The main difference is the guitar ringing throughout the soundtrack. Overall, it's a more metal version of treachery, not as imperial but more sinister. We have another 1000-Year Blood War remix as well, dubbed ominously. For this theme, it does not have the choir, rather it is more of an instrumental. This one seems like a more lighthearted and soothing version of treachery, with most of the tension dispersed with the new instruments chiming in. Finally, we have this final one, which gives off a completely different vibe. It's like a techno dance party version of treachery. The music is as if Aizen turned Hueco Mundo into a big rave, as if he made Las Noches into a nightclub and all the hollows danced in their free time. To summarize, the soundtrack of Treachery represents an inner monologue of thoughts that go down when you are being betrayed. Although this is not Aizen's soundtrack, it does directly fit with him, since deception and treachery is a main characteristic of his. It is a fairly versatile theme and has many remixes to match specific atmospheres, and so no wonder it is one of Bleach's most popular soundtracks. Let me know what soundtrack you'd like me to analyze next. Before I go further on Aizen's character, ask yourself this: what is the main objective of Bleach? The main plot? What is the main story? The main goal? Through Ichigo's eyes, it is clear as day: save his friends, protect all those around him, and get stronger in order to do so. But through a select few, it is quite different, but also similar in how their intentions all revolve around the main character. Bleach has often been likened as a chess match to control one man, Ichigo Kurosaki. When looked through the eyes of the 2 biggest players in Bleach, it makes sense. The 2 characters who can be credited for most of Ichigo's growth in Aizen and Urahara. They both were incredibly vital in Ichigo's ascent, so much so that it gives you the feeling that this could not have just been a coincidence. For these two, the main objective of Bleach could have very well been to cultivate this weapon of mass destruction that is Ichigo. While it was Aizen that set the framework of things, the overall plan, it was Urahara who would be on the field working to ensure everything works out. Without either side, things wouldn't have been possible. Like two sides of one coin, both were vital in the rise of the heroic hybrid, the world's greatest protector. Both perhaps sought to satisfy a thirst of curiosity in seeing how powerful a being could become in Ichigo. As mentioned earlier, Aizen sought an equal, so that could have very well been his motivation behind Ichigo. Or maybe he truly wanted to change the world and thought that Ichigo would be the weapon to do exactly that. As for Urahara, it could be that he was preparing Ichigo for the ultimate duty as the Soul King, or maybe it was just to open a door and see what was possible. I would also like to think that Urahara brought up Ichigo so that there would be someone to stop him if needed, if he were to become corrupt. And so did Urahara train Ichigo to be an absolute weapon, so that if he does fall, if he does go mad, if he eventually descends into darkness, someone will be there to take care of it? All of this will be discussed soon as I'll make a thorough rundown of Urahara, so be sure to sub for that video. Despite Aizen and Urahara's differences, it is ironic how their goals are similar in helping Ichigo achieve that potential of his. Whereas Aizen was the one who planned everything, it was Urahara who worked behind the scenes to ensure his plans came to fruition. While Aizen can be likened to the orchestrator of the series, Urahara can be likened to the conductor of the series. That is the beauty of Bleach. Both of these characters could not have come this far in their goals without each other's labors. They in a way were working together in a dance of two doubtful demons. All that said, a chess match won't be the best analogy because there are more than two big players in this game. Many others were vying for control of Ichigo in their own ways, for their own reasons, and they all had a part to play in his development. While Aizen planned Ichigo from the dark, indirectly, from behind the scenes, dictating his path and obstacles, Urahara groomed Ichigo from the light, directly, in plain sight as his mentor. All the while, Yhwach would influence Ichigo through the shadows, in both planes via Zangetsu, the shadowy figure who played the role as an inner guide for Ichigo. These three were responsible for harnessing Ichigo's Shinigami, Hollow, and Quincy powers, as well as being a part of most of his journey. Aizen gave Ichigo obstacles and supplied him with White, who would be a tremendous help in Ichigo's journey. Urahara set the foundations for both his Shinigami and Hollow powers, while ensuring he would make it out of every challenge in one piece. Zangetsu will watch over Ichigo and limit/give him access to his abilities, while also ensuring his survival. All these characters were vital in Ichigo's growth and survival. For Zangetsu, his reasoning was to prevent Ichigo from running down the path that led him to face off against Yhwach, and eventually bring him together with the Quincy, but as time went on, that would change. These three were incredibly important in grooming Ichigo to be the nuclear war power that he is. Alongside White, his trusty Zanpakto, you can even add another character to the mix, to a lesser degree in Ginjo Kugo. Ginjo would help him unlock his Fullbringer abilities and be his guide, so to speak, in the Fullbringer arc, at a time when the light was gone for Ichigo, with Aizen, Urahara, Zangetsu White, and all his other allies out of the picture. Ginjo sought to take Ichigo's powers for his own to protect himself and his crew. You could also say that he wanted to relieve Ichigo of his burden of having those countless abilities, remove this curse, at least in his eyes. All these characters contributed to Ichigo's growth, but also had plans of their own in regards to him. For some characters, it is easier to understand what their plans and intentions were, but for others not so much. Perhaps time will tell and we'll learn more in the Hell arc. Until then, we can only speculate. To summarize, these characters were essential in Ichigo's growth. They were not just helping out Ichigo out of the goodness of their hearts. They all had their different motives, and whether they were pure or not, whether they sought to bring Ichigo up through support and encouragement, or break him down so he could become stronger, they all looked to use Ichigo in one way or another. All four characters and more will have their own videos in my CFYOW Own World series, so be sure to check them out. Then of course you have the Zero Squad. In the eyes of the top Shinigami, you can see that they viewed Ichigo as a potential Soul King replacement if something were to happen to the current one. I am sure Ichibei and Zero Squad must have been watching over Ichigo very closely for that very reason. Although they did not have a big part to play in his development like the others, they did get involved early in Thousand Year Blood War, and again, there was a reason for all of it. It was not just out of the goodness of their heart, so that he can conquer the Quincy, but rather as a plan B in case the current Soul King cannot continue his duties. For the Zero Squad, their sole mission was to ensure the stability of the world, and so you cannot really blame them for their intentions behind Ichigo. It was Ichibe's duty to ensure the world continues on and runs like it currently does. We do not know whether a world run differently would be better, and so Zero Squad does have the intention of the world's best interest in mind. Nevertheless, it leaves us in a weird position with mixed emotions when the main character would have been used in the worst case scenario. All the big players in Bleach are lurking and playing their cards in the shadows, but you can see through it how Bleach could very well be a battle over the nuclear weapon that is Ichigo Kurosaki. Now back to Aizen. It is no secret that the Soul King debacle is of interest to Sosuke Aizen. What happens in a world without God, when God has been killed and its remnants have been used to rule the world? Is this the optimal state of a world without an autonomously functioning God? Well, if God is dead, why not have someone rise and replace it? Thus is the tale of Sosuke Aizen, and fans have drawn many connections between Aizen and Friedrich Nietzsche's work. Let's explore these connections. Nietzsche is known for making the statement, God is dead. By this he was alluding to the loss of faith and meaning derived from God and religion, thus resulting in a dark period for humanity. However, according to Nietzsche, this is necessary for the evolution of a greater being that transcends all those around him, all those in the past. This being was coined as the Ubermensch. All of this is very fitting in the Bleach world. This is because the statement of God is dead is not taken figuratively like Nietzsche did through metaphors, but literally. In Bleach we learn of the Soul King, the linchpin of the world, a mutilated being in stasis between life and death, who holds the realms together. The Soul King would seem to be a literal definition of God is dead. Then comes the Ubermensch, which many have likened to Sosuke Aizen. Ubermensch has often been translated as Overman or Superman. To summarize, it stands for the superior man, a man who transcends all those around him, a man who will create his own set of values outside the influence of God, religion, and societal norms. Someone who does not follow the status quo like all others, but embodies the characteristics of a Superman, an ideal human. There is more to all these terms, but to make things simple, that's as far as I will go. And so ask yourself, what happens when a world that has run on God for so long comes to the realization that God is dead? When a world no longer follows God and religion? This will lead to moral decay, suffering, but in Nietzsche's eyes, it will eventually birth the rise of an Ubermensch. This in a way is what happened in Bleach, with Aizen finding out of the Soul King. For Aizen, we don't know why or how he became himself, but in the loss to Ichigo and Kisuke, his final words would lead us to assume that the Soul King had a part in it. To be ruled by a lifeless being, a being considered dead, must have been a factor in his ascent. For Nietzsche, an antidote to the despair of no longer running in a world where God is prevalent in the hearts of all was the Ubermensch, which is again what Aizen could be likened to, as one of the select beings who knew of the Soul King. Furthermore, Aizen states that he goes against everyone who tries to control him, which relates to the Ubermensch quality of creating your own set of values and going against the status quo. This is also fitting of the Nietzschean concept of master morality, morality of the strong-willed, the powerful, the morality of the masters and rulers compared to those of slaves. To add on to this, the opposite of the Ubermensch would be the last man, a being who lacks the qualities of an Ubermensch, a being who is characterized to seek comfort, stability, who is complacent and lacks ambition, a being who seeks to keep the status quo rather than creating his own values, which is important in this case. This term would more so fit Kisuke Urahara. It is not a perfect fit, but it does more so represent the way he sees the world and how he operates in comparison to Aizen. Through Aizen's speech, we hear how he despises Kisuke, for despite his intellect, he does not choose to create a world of his own, choosing not to do anything to change the world, at least in the eyes of Aizen. Kisuke chooses to accept the world as how it is, which is a last man characteristic compared to Aizen, who strives to change the world to his ideals, a more Ubermensch characteristic. That said, these concepts are not what makes these characters, they are just one of the many ideologies that fit them. And this is not to say that the Ubermensch or the last man is right. On paper, one may seem right, but when put in practice, it is not always the case, as seen with Aizen and Kisuke, with Kisuke being seen as the more righteous one. To end things off with Nietzsche and Aizen, I think Aizen's defeat is ironic since Nietzsche himself went mad near the end of his life. As Ichigo mentioned, he felt loneliness in Aizen's blade, and if you attribute Aizen's loss to his internal longing for a rival, with the Hogyoku granting that, then it was Aizen who defeated himself. So Nietzsche losing it is similar to Aizen himself losing it and how their own mental issues led to their downfall. Now what about Aizen's relation to mythology? Well, just off Aizen's name, you can draw reference to Buddhist mythology through Aizen Myo-o. Aizen Myo-o, with the Sanskrit name of Ragaraja, is one of the wisdom kings in Buddhism. Aizen Myo-o has one face and 6 arms, which could be symbolic to Aizen's demon butterfly form, with the arms perhaps being the tentacles or whatever it is. Aizen Myo-o was also said to be depicted as aiming a bow to the heavens, which could be symbolic of his conquest to take over the Soul King's palace and reign supreme. This being was also known to have the ability to cut through illusions through a Vajra, which is fitting for Sosuke Aizen, considering his illusory abilities. Myo-o also holds a lotus, which could relate to his Zanpakto ability, more on this later. Aizen Myo-o was known for transforming carnality and lust into spiritual awakening and enlightenment. This could be likened to integrating that hollow side to ascend to new heights and evolve into something greater, which is something he has taken an interest in. Myo-o also has a third eye on his forehead, and while Aizen does not have one, he does have a sort of imprint on it in his chrysalis form. The third eye is known to provide perception beyond ordinary sight, and if there ever was a Bleach character who would have this, other than almighty users, I'd say Aizen would be a great fit. In addition, there's also the wish-fulfilling jewel, the Chintamani, which is popular in Hindu and Buddhist mythologies. This can be likened to the Philosopher's Stone of alchemy, and in a sense, characters like Aizen and Urahara are alchemists. The jewel was known to be held by Aizen Myo-o, which is another similarity, as well as Kanon, who was related to Urahara, who also had his own Hogyoku. Although Aizen Myo-o does more so represent Komamura's Bankai, and even Zaraki's Bankai through appearance, this being does share some similarities to Aizen through everything previously mentioned, but mainly through the name. Speaking of Aizen's name, it supposedly stands for indigo. When split up, the I could stand for love, and the Zen, thought or meditation. So love of thought or meditation, kind of fitting for the one who supposedly plans everything. Now what about his Zanpakto in Kyoka Suigetsu? Kyoka Suigetsu manipulates the 5 senses of his opponents to create a perfect illusion. It literally translates into mirror, flower, water, moon. This is what is known as a Yoji Jukugo, which are 4 character idioms, sayings that can be generalized into 4 characters or kanji. Yoji Jukugo itself is a great example as it is made of 4 characters, meaning 4 characters, wise word. In essence, it is summarizing a saying or lesson in 4 words, and so there is some interpretation needed as you cannot always tell the full story in 4 words. As for mirror, flower, water, moon, it is a Yoji Jukuko of a Chinese idiom which translates into flower seen in the mirror, moon on the water's surface. And so Kyoka Suigetsu represents something beautiful that is seemingly close and desirable but unattainable. Something that looks like it can be touched or reached, but in reality it cannot. Perhaps an object or a goal that one may want to seek that seems to be in front of you, thought to be close, but in reality you are far from it. The flower seen in the mirror is not the actual flower but a reflection of it, an illusion. The moon in the water is not the actual moon but again a reflection, a mere mirage. We hear something similar to this when Byakuya fought Renji. Byakuya would say that he was the moon and Renji was the monkey sitting to reach the moon through the reflection in the water. All in all, stating he was far above Renji in ways he did not understand. Now back to Kyoka Suigetsu. Imagine if someone wanted to touch the flower, the moon, and they went through the mirror and hurt themselves, or if they jumped into the water and drowned. That is what Aizen's ability represents, and it does well to highlight his illusory abilities and his ideologies that those around him are all in a facade, an illusion going after the wrong thing. At least in Aizen's eyes, he believes everyone is seeing things from a limited perspective. When he activates his Zanpakto's abilities, all of this is true. The Zanpakto is an extension of the soul, and so it does well to represent Aizen through his illusory nature. There is some irony to his abilities and character as well. as he himself fell to the mirage of being undefeatable. Furthermore, him gaining immortality from the Ogyoku after seemingly regretting it from his final words in Mukin in regards to courage shows off some irony as well. Aizen himself said, fear is necessary for evolution, the very fear that any given moment you could perish and vanish from existence. But Aizen would lose that fear with the Hogyoku, and so in a way he was living in an illusion. He was chasing after that flower in the mirror, the moon in the water. Aizen's released command of shatter refers to the mirror, the destruction of the illusion of the mirror. This brings into question, why only shatter? Why is there no relation to water or moon? Perhaps if Aizen was to go Bankai, his release command would make more use of the different words. Aizen and his pupil in Tosen share some similarities in abilities and what they represent as well, with ignorance being a big one. Again, see Tosen's video for more on this. While Tosen wipes out the 5 senses in his Bankai, Aizen manipulates them with his Shikai. Both were also seemingly blinded by their powers in their defeat, blinded by their own ignorance, which is an important teaching in Buddhism. The evolution of Aizen's forms speaks to his ideologies as well, as he is a good proponent of metamorphosis, transformation, transcendence. For Aizen, perfection is not the goal, but evolution. While Moyuri tackles this perfection debacle through scientific improvement, Aizen tackles it through transcendence and evolution of the self, breaking the boundaries of what was thought to be possible with his ever-evolving nature, progressing through different forms. This can be further symbolized through Aizen's chrysalis form, a cocoon-like state, and then evolving into what seemed like a monstrous butterfly, and then still continuing to evolve, even when a butterfly would supposedly be the last stage of evolution. Even with the demon butterfly, Aizen was yet to reach his zenith. There were still ways to go. This was not perfection. But to do that, Aizen needed something to push himself further in the form of Ichigo and Urahara. Aizen constantly sought ways to further evolve, whether that be holification, the Hogyoku, fear, and even catering the rise of a heroic hybrid. Even at the supposed end of the evolution chain, the butterfly form, Aizen would continue to evolve, breaking the status quo and destroying what was thought to be possible. I'm sure he would have kept on evolving as well if the fight continued on. To continue on further, some of Aizen's quotes and poems show us much in regards to his character. The poem Flower on the Precipice highlights the beauty of a flower growing in a place it was not meant to, a place that we would never even have access to. While all other flowers are rooted deep within the ground, this one took to the skies. Aizen assigns the trait of courage to the flower for continuing to thrive, for stepping into the sky, despite many believing it had no chance to survive. In a way, Aizen is telling us to do what is thought to be impossible, while others fear. Have the courage to go above and beyond, like the flower growing on the edge. Don't let the fears of this world and society condition you to believe what is possible and what isn't. Discover the truth and don't let the fear of others' opinions hold you back from being exceptional. All of this can tie back to his speech on courage as well. In a way, Aizen is that very flower on the precipice, the lone anomaly in the world's escarpment. Furthermore, we see this poem under the chapter of God is Dead. This further accentuates the divide Aizen believes he has between everyone else. We know he thinks he is superior, and so this quote shows us that. It further pushes his reasoning for evolution, as he believes apes, people, and gods are all tied together, seeking to become something greater than them all. This also ties into his speech on how gods are born. Aizen's knowledge on the Soul King must have shaped his perspective in the aforementioned quotes. It explains why he looks down on godhood, knowing that the Soul King is pretty much dead. It also shows his views on everyone else as those of the herd following others, relying on others rather than becoming self-sufficient and living their own lives with their own set of values. For Aizen, he believes others need blind obedience to function, a god or a king to lead them, and through all other aspects of his character you can conclude that he sees this as a weakness, which isn't necessarily true. Maybe this is because this was once Aizen's perspective before he learned of the Soul King, and so maybe he is speaking from experience. These quotes also demonstrate a chain of evolution, from ape to people, from people to kings to gods. And so this brings up the question, what is after that? The supreme ruler? The king of gods in the real? What is next? Based on what we know of Aizen, through these quotes, you can sort of see Aizen's ambition to transcend into the next stage. Imagine if you are nearly perfect, if you are constantly evolving and you find out the next stage is a dead god. How would you feel? Well, for Aizen, he was let down, understandably. And so this helps you better understand his hatred for the Soul King, seeing the next stage of evolution as a lifeless linchpin of the world. Aizen's quote in regards to truth or lies is also very important. As mentioned earlier, Aizen is a seeker of truth, a very catalyst for spreading hidden facts. This quote shows off his propensity for finding the truth, the importance he places on it, as well as why he believes he is superior to most. He believes everyone lives in an illusion, a fairy tale, choosing to believe only what is convenient to them. He says that the truth is radically different from others, and it is different from the cold, hard facts. Looking at our world, things do not seem so different. The average person chooses to believe the facts convenient to them, often the first things they hear without ever contemplating the validity. No wonder the news outlets will tell us the news that is convenient to them when the majority of the people soak it up. And so when discussing the truth, it's important to differentiate between this from what you like to hear, what they'd like you to hear, and finally, the cold, hard facts. In these cases, some skepticism is healthy to have. Too much or too little can be problematic, but having a balance in this seems like a good way to live. Aizen's perspective is that of an extreme as well. To live a life seeking to learn all the world's secrets could damage your psyche greatly, as seen by the various Bleach characters, more of which I will discuss in their own videos. Some may choose to live a simple life, one of delusion, which is probably what Aizen would say. For some, that is what gives them joy and peace. But for Aizen and those who advocate for the truth and seeking out this knowledge, that is not the case. The truth in the Bleach world is dark, and it could bring out the worst in you, and the history of our world is no different. But I do believe seeking the truth is better than living in ignorance. Finding the right balance between everything is very important. Aizen was also likened as the gaze in the sun by Kubo, so let's try to understand what is meant by this. In a symbolic sense, the sun is like a patriarchal figure, like a wise old leader. It represents the divine masculine. When the sun is out, it is like you're in the presence of a strict elder. You bow down your head and get to work. You don't directly look up and stare out of respect and authority. And of course, with the sun, you cannot directly gaze into it for long periods without hurting yourself. And so to liken someone to the gaze in the sun shows their rebellious nature, their tendency to do something out of the norm. This, in a way, symbolizes Aizen not being afraid of the consequences from the rulers, whether it be the Gote, Central 46, or the Zero Squad. It also shows that Aizen is an anomaly, being able to gaze into the sun, something most people cannot do without taking damage. The gaze in the sun could also be taken symbolically for his conquest to reign supreme over the heavens. The sun shines over all, and so perhaps it signifies Aizen seeking to stand above everyone and dictate the world just like the sun does. To gaze into the sun means to blind you, and so maybe the phrase represents Aizen's abilities in Kyoka, which can blind you to an extent that you don't know what is truly happening. Kubo often uses symbolism with the sun and the moon, so it could have different meanings. For example, Ichigo is often referred to as the Black Sun. The black sun, the missing sun, is easier to gaze at and does not blind you, and it was Ichigo who beat Aizen. It was Ichigo who was not blinded by Kyoka. Also, it was Ichigo who truly understood Aizen by the end of their battle. Or the phrase could have an entirely different meaning. That was just me trying to make sense of it. Let me know what you think. For Aizen, there are always new levels to reach, new peaks to conquer. There is always an opportunity to shatter what was thought to be possible, and Aizen does this through the betterment of the self. This allowed him to transcend his limits as well as everyone around him, and it was done through gaining knowledge and exposing himself to trials. To be able to evolve like this, you must be formless and constantly changing. You must not over-identify too much with who you are or who you once were, but instead put your focus on what you can be and be open to change. If we could learn anything from Aizen, it would be that. Through knowledge gained with it being rigorously applied, we can learn how to better ourselves and evolve. But the theoretical aspect is not enough. You need experience on the field to sharpen and mold yourself. Like a swordsmith, we must shape and cultivate the blade, forge our souls through trial and circumstance, the swinging of blades, iron against iron, steel against steel, and finally, soul against soul is a time-tested way to evolve and get better. Through knowledge of evolution, holification, through the deep desire to evolve for the better, Hogoku, and through trials, opponents, Aizen has amplified his growth and become what he is today. In short, despite being the closest thing to perfection, Aizen showed us that it cannot be attained. because there's always another way to evolve, another form to reach, and you can expect Aizen to continue to evolve in the future. Through the series we learn that the world is grey and complex. There are multiple sides to everything, and so we must understand all perspectives when uncovering the truth, rather than believing what everyone thinks. We must focus on the cold hard facts instead of trusting what is convenient. Don't just accept the world as how it is, but strive to make it how it should be. Be the pioneer for change and evolution, but do so in a less chaotic and radical way, of course. Don't go around killing and manipulating everyone around you, please. Have the courage to separate yourself from the others. Don't blindly follow everyone around you like you are under someone's version of 𝚆𝚖𝚎𝚎𝚎𝚎. See through the illusions, break through the herd-like conditioning, and live a life fitting for you. Evolve in ways that others never would have thought were possible, shattering everyone's conception of what can be accomplished. All the while, spread some knowledge, spread the truth like a messenger from the heavens, so that you can help others evolve as well. I believe all of this is what Aizen stood for, and I'm sure he would advocate the above as well. These are all great qualities of Aizen, but he also holds some negative ones, mainly in his manipulative nature and lack of empathy. Aizen saw a problem in the world, and to fix it, he would bring upon much conflict, chaos, and death. It could be that this was the only way, but I find that hard to believe, especially with someone as powerful and intelligent as Aizen. Aizen in a way shows you what not to do, the true mentality of a loser. If you see a problem, work to fix it, but don't go around killing people and causing this much destruction. With such intelligence, to waste it on killing would be a disservice to your soul. To fall in such weak ways, to change the world by raising those around you is the greatest way you can do it, rather than slitting the throats of those who are no longer useful to you. Look no further than the winner, the hero of the world in Ichigo for that. Perhaps that is why he was the victor and Aizen was the loser. It was Ichigo who won the battle of ideologies, and that was why he was victorious. These devilish qualities of Aizen leads on to the next topic, archetypes. Aizen's birthday is on May 29th. Astrologically speaking, this makes him born under the sign of Gemini. Now, I would assume that Aizen's birthday does not serve any importance to the story, but through the archetypes of the zodiac sign it does fit his character. Gemini is a sign that is ruled by the planet Mercury, which represents communication, thoughts, logic, intellect, curiosity, and so on. The planet represents rational and non-emotional thought, which is all fitting for Aizen. Gemini is also an air sign, with air signs being known as the deep thinkers, the communicators of the zodiac. Furthermore, Gemini is a mutable sign, which is considered to be versatile and highly adaptable. It represents constant change, which is very fitting for the ever-evolving enigma. All of this corresponds to Aizen's character, as he is seen as a logic-centered, intelligent person, a versatile being with a sharp wit. The symbol for Gemini is the two twins, and it represents the dualistic nature of those born under this sign. Geminis have the stereotype of being two-faced, of being deceptive tricksters able to put on different masks, which is quite fitting for Aizen. The duality is important for those in this sign. It allows them to see different perspectives. Gemini is a bridge between both sides, between yin and yang, good, bad, opposing viewpoints. It is the collector and distributor of information, which represents the two sides as seen by the symbol. Mercury is the messenger of the gods in mythology, and so Gemini is very much like a messenger in that way, the learner and communicator of ideas. In Aizen's case, he'd impose his view on others, and he did well to represent the Gemini archetype, being a catalyst of the truth, the revealer of many secrets of his world. This can also be seen by Aizen spreading holification. Gemini is a curious sign, a social one, which you can relate to Aizen, with him again knowing the secrets of the world, and him being a popular Gote captain at one point. Gemini are best known to employ their weapons as words, and Aizen is perhaps the greatest at this among all Bleach characters. Finally, the motto for Gemini, the dominant key word would be I think, which is very fitting for Aizen, the man who plans everything. In short, Aizen fits well with the archetypes associated with Gemini. An archetype that would be fitting to Aizen would be that of a fallen angel. The fallen god/angel archetype is prevalent in mythology and many stories throughout time. One popular example of this would be Lucifer. Incredible amounts of pride, a notable sin, had caused Lucifer to fall, It was also through pride and a bit of trickery that humanity was cast away from the Garden of Eden, as they sought to become like God. The same can be said of the prideful Aizen. The god of death sought to reign supreme over the heavens in a domain that wasn't his, and as a result he'd commit inexplicable acts of treachery. It is often considered that pride is the worst sin of all, the original sin that leads to all others. The thought that you alone will reign supreme over the world brings upon all kinds of vices and sins. It allows you to justify any sort of heinous act, and that is what happened to Aizen. Yes, he had the betterment of the world in mind, but through his actions you may think otherwise. This pride can be seen in most Bleach characters, but no one is close to the dangerous amounts that Sosuke Aizen possesses. It was pride that casted Aizen down from godhood as a Shinigami, and it was pride that led to his defeat, pride of a lonely kind, pride that made Aizen feel that no one was near him. The excess of pride is a characteristic of evil, and while I have said a lot vouching for Aizen, it could very well have been that Aizen just sought power and control over all, and he used the Soul King debacle as an excuse to defect and conquer. The devilish aspect of deception is also the main trait of Aizen. The devil is considered to be the ultimate deceiver, and so this adds to Aizen's notoriety, as well as how he is perceived by all. To deceive is considered to be more of a cowardly tactic, rather than settling your quarrels face to face with strength. Maybe that is what 𝚆𝚐𝚎𝚎 would think, someone who is all about direct confrontation. I am sure someone as loyal as Ichigo would think this to be cowardly as well, but to deceive on such a level as Aizen did requires loads of intelligence as well, so it is not without skill. But still it is frowned upon. Those who deceive their own kind are considered to be scum of the earth, and so it is fitting with this fallen angel archetype. All of this is not to say Aizen was based on such beings as the devil. It is just to show one of the many archetypes that fall within his character. The devil may be the one who seeks to lead others astray, and although Aizen is very devil-like in his manipulation, it's through his lessons that he teaches us to think on your own, something that is the exact opposite of what the devil would want us to do. All that said, if we are to label Aizen as such, we must do the same with many Shinigami, especially those who were part of the original sin in Bleach, the Soul King's mutilation, the very Shinigami who founded the Bleach world we know today. To be a part of such a thing, you must have had to be deceptive and prideful. Who truly is the fallen god in this case? Aizen, or the ones who mutilated God, the ones who forced the Soul King into a state of neither alive nor dead, the ones who sought to overthrow the old worlds in Aizen, was no different from the founding clan members who did the same in a way. Is it victory that decides who the fallen angel is? The victors who write history? How can we be so sure that this fallen angel was not on the right side in a world marred by treachery, in a world bleached by grey?
I refuse to accept the world ruled by that thing! I am a victor! I shall decide how the world should be!
Shatter the cracked mirror. Differentiate between truth and lie. Clear your emotions. Make the path clearer. Stay clear of limitations that cloud the eye. Disperse the reflected moon. Don't drown to delusion's wrath. To mediocrity no one is immune, so have courage to take your own path. Ever scheming and treacherous was the king of lies, who labored hard to surpass the god in disguise. From Shinigami to humans and all between he'd cut ties. As for him, all others were mere apes in disguise. With power and ideas most cannot comprehend, the deceiver would employ them in ways that would offend. The world he sought to change would be the one he would defend, all for the opportunity to evolve, transcend, making an appearance only when there is a cataclysmic brawl, regulated to a throne of dark solitude, with only his life to recall. For despite being the transcendent one, leagues above all, it was his greatness that ultimately led to his fall. How can you judge right or wrong when you are blind? When it's your very outlook that is confined? How can you change the course of mankind when the problem originates within your mind? How can you understand when your thoughts cannot perceive what it is you truly want, what it is you can achieve? How can you comprehend when it's your senses that deceive? What the world is like that you truly are naive? The world is filled with treachery, so open your eyes. All you may have known may very well be a guise. The world may seem manipulated to shepherd man, but know how things go is only up to you to plan. Think for yourself instead of blindly following convenient views. You are the one in control. Your life is up to you to choose. Seek the truth to dispel the confusion. Live by them and dissolve the illusion. To overcome a crisis that is existential, shatter the limitations of your potential. You are only as great as your resolve. So when met with hardship, seek to evolve in your path of ascension to your throne. Heed the words and let them be known. Be wary of the supposed righteous who lie in sleuth, and pay attention to the one who lies while speaking the truth.
From now on, I alone will stand at the top. Goodbye, Soul Reapers.